And today I'm trying to discuss a little bit about what biochar is representing for industries in this period and how we should approach this matter. This presentation is born because in the recent period, let's say last 2 years, we start to interact deeply with a lot of companies here in Italy, try to propose biochar as a solution and reliable replacement for their productions. Our problem, well, our problems were different. The first one is the same that a lot of you got during their work. So presenting biochar has something that they can understand. Industry generally, it's resilient to understand differences. And so if you've worked with carbon black for 20 years and you are going to promote something slightly different, the first answer that you are going to receive is no, every time. So this is our first problem that we faced. The second one was a little bit more complex, and it is represented by the biochar itself, how it is produced, where it is produced, and now we can standardize it for a large scale production all across the country. So you've read around, you've worked with the conviction that biochar is a revolution. Uh, it can be, but all the enthusiasm about all the great efforts they are putting there should be downsized a little bit, stop and think about. For the simple reason that we are working, major of us, of course, into the lab, even if I'll try. Okay, I'll try to. Okay, so I'll try to be a little bit loud, so beg your pardon if the volume is too low. So what I'm saying is simple. If we are facing this material on lab scale, even if the lab scale is quite huge, because I'm thinking about the big pyrolyzers that some of us got in their labs, that scale is not what we can propose as a real industrial scale. Even if a very large pyrolyzer, 100 kilograms per hour, it's something that if you're going to propose the material to a real big company, and we did it with Michelin for replacing a part of their production of tires, they say, okay, you can provide how much tons per day? And it's a good question, trust me. So when we are thinking to biochar as the revolution and we try to breach biochar into the industrial sector, it's difficult. So I'm trying to discuss about how we can do and how we cannot do and how we should communicate this point to companies because this is the key next step. It's not the production of biochar with 10 square meters more of surface area. It's not the production of instead of 45% of biochar or 46% during your experiments. It's not producing biochar that can be absorbed 1 milligram more. It's try to sell what we have in the correct manner without self-illusions. And trust me, it's something that we must have at this point if you want to move on. So start from the good news, at least. If you are looking about how Europe is moving in the sector, the trend is clear. We are increasing our production and we are increasing our capacity year by year. Actually, we are able in Europe, if everything is going well, to produce up 65,000 tons per year, more or less, with more than 50 large industrial plants. And it's quite a huge number if you think that when I started in 2014, just in Italy, there is no pyrolytic unit that is running for the production of biochar. So keep in mind that, and seeing how also the world is moving. Because if you see the China and US market, you see that it's a little bit higher, far higher if you consider in China. Well, there is some interesting industrial sector for biochar, and this is a key point. And keep in mind this: if you think to a biochar production unit that you can buy today, just a simple one is producing biochar at 400 degrees. Let's see, mm, processing of 100 kilograms, 200 kilograms per hour from Boston Company, for example. The investment that you should do is not so huge as has been 10 years ago. With 100,000 euros, you can have that unit. But the point is, you should buy it. There is space for a real market, not for the short bubble market that you can see around. Can be the enthusiasm that we have as a researcher and as technician and as an entrepreneur to move on to something that is a real industrial scale. And when I meant real, meant that if you see how they are distribute all the industrial plants, you can see that there are a lot of them bigger and bigger, a lot of them that are smaller. But let's crunch some numbers. Let's see if we are producing actually 20 kilotons of biochar each year with the yields that spanning from 18 up to 60 percentage. What we need to produce it? We need some biomass, some dry biomass generally, because wet biomass, well, no one want to dry water during the process, so we should remove it. So what we need is something that is ranging from 46 to 180 kilotons of biomass, neat biomass each year. Here I report just Rundodonax and some SRC that are producing a lot of biomass per hectare. And as you can see, it's a very small amount of the overall European agricultural available surface. It's practically nothing, but that space should be found. And here there is the first problem. It's costly a lot. Here in Italy, 1 hectare of biomass for just combustion on domestic use that is tax-free, actually, it's quite remunerative for who has it. And the cost of make a plant for production of biochar is something that cannot be considered. So even if for the environment can be beneficial from a, an entrepreneur that should be moved to something that is not only profit but also accountability, well, in that case, it's not something that can be enforced. And I saw it a lot of times. We are going to uh, companies and start to discuss. They finance us with some small project to see if it is possible. We are producing data, results, good results, sometimes better results, bad results. But at a certain point, when the project is end, also the interest is end. It's a strange field now because there is a lot of research has been done. But again, it is miss a critical point. It is miss a selling point. So we kind of subtract space from culture, of course, because we are subtracting them from food chains. It's not something that we want. We need good quality of biomass. Trust me, it's costly, at least in Italy. It's far costly. So, and we need that the biomass is well available on industrial scale. So we need kilotons and possibly megatons of dry biomass to be processed. But of course, as practically every one of us knows, we can just combine the production of biochar with the waste management approach. But even if in this case, when the waste producers start to think to the waste as a resource, they start to sell it. And even if the regulation is a little bit fuzzy, a waste can be formally converted in a side product, and the side product can be sold. And that is the other point. If I want to use wood chips that is produced from the wood cuts and generally was just disposed, I can try to use it. And in the very first place, I just remember one time in 2019 when we start to work on this particular approach, the industry that is processing wood, forestry industry, provide us that materials. But, but when a company tried to do the same thing, the answer was, okay, you can have it, but you should pay for it. In that case, what was a waste becomes a product and start rising in price, and that cut everything. And the simple reason is that biochar, at least here in Italy, but also in all the other countries, should be face carbon black. Carbon black is the real competitor, not graphene, not carbon nanotubes. Who is saying that carbon biochar can replace carbon nanotubes and graphene is saying something that is totally unreal, because those materials have a very short and little market. Biochar should be face carbon because these are the numbers of carbon intake. See, thousands of metric tons, thousands of metric tons consumed each year. And here we should face the real problem. And the real problem is that that market is quite stable and diffuse across all the Italy, while the biomass are not uniformly distributed. Biochar production plants, at least here, are scarce. Legislation is foggy, transportation is expensive. So when I think to an economy like the Italian economy, I think that biochar could be a solution. There is Italian Biochar Association that say yes, of course, but it's true. So let's start from something that every scientist is doing in these cases, using numbers, using a tool that can be shared. So a very basic one, an LCA study. And this is very simple. I applied an LCA study to the production of biochar in Italy, considering as an input the feedstock and the energy used, the supply chains, and the process, the plants dimension, emissions, and production and product production, using as geographical constraints Italy. So as input, I select two different ones, olive waste and crop waste, of course, and has input energy, gas or gasoline or electricity. And this is the supply chain that I figured out. Medium voltage energy distribution net, and the one that is in Italy. The transportation made by truck, here 6, and the producer feedstock. And as process, I use a kiln type reactor because it's the one that actually is guaranteed the highest yield in biochar, and is reducing a lot the production of bio-oil. Curiously, when I start to work in this field, bio-oil was the key player before the revolution in the drop-in fuel sector. It wasn't. Now we move to biochar. So, and we consider, of course, one to move biochar produced. So, this is our plant, and you can see here's a plant that produces biochar, a little bit of fly ash, and just gas. With nominal biochar yield around 30%. That is good for a non-autothermal combustion process, and it's something that you can buy around with the actual regulation that is enforced in Italy. And all of these are the parameters that I try to investigate with this study. The first one and the critical one is GWP 100, that is the calculation how our process is impacting for the equivalent CO2 emission in 100 years. And of course, the other are key parameters for evaluate all the other environmental impacts. So let's start from the very simple approach. using a production of biochar, 1 ton of biochar, using that plant on site, so the biomass is there and I shouldn't move it, and using electricity as source of energy. And as you can see, in 100 years, we have a considerable reduction of greenhouse gas emission. Just it. And if you compare this approach with the simple combustion, those savings are increased a lot. Because otherwise, this is the need save of just producing and using it as it is. It's not compared with the simple combustion. So keep in mind, if you want to produce biochar on site without moving biomass, you are beneficially impacting the overall greenhouse gas emission, at least in Italy, with those constraints. And it means if you enforce a blockchain approach for carbon credits, you can prove that you are reducing the carbon footprint of your process, generating carbon credit during the production of biochar. But if you move the biomass, at least for 100 kilometers, that is quite common in Italy, because you are producing biomass in one place and you are moving it to a centralized unit. Well, in this case, you are negatively impact GWP 100 and also deplete the other sources. Same and a lot, and it is not a linear relationship, but is an exponential one if you are moved from 100 to 200 kilometers. See, it's huge. And all of these calculations have been made considering using green electricity as input energy for the process. But if you move from that to natural gas or gasoline, also you are impacting it without moving any kind of biomass. And I challenge you to find a very huge unit that are working only on electricity without burning natural gas or gasoline to produce the electricity inside. Same thing, moving from natural gas to petroleum liquefied gases. It's quite common here in Italy. You see, same problem. Same, the numbers are just there. Some of you can argue that, of course, they are bad, but we are comparing them with carbon black. And that's true, of course. If you are replacing with carbon black with biochar, you are saving some CO2 produced during the production of carbon black, but you are not enforcing a carbon negative approach. You are just reducing your emission. You are not, at least in the Italian ecosystem, contribute to the active removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. So, and this is what I stressed out from just the LCA. Our dream to use biochar instead of carbon black or other carbon sources to actively sequestrate CO2 inside it, it's not fully true. It is more beneficial than using carbon black, that's true. And that's a real thing. But production of biochar is not a carbon negative approach to removing CO2. And that's it. Numbers are numbers. And this is a problem because if you want to enforce and create profits on carbon credits, enforcing a blockchain, that's a problem. And the other problem is the cost. If you're producing biochar here, try to combine waste management and biochar production, you should face these numbers. 1 kilogram of biochar produced in Italy is around €2. If it's clean for food application, it is rising at €8. Why? 1 kilogram of biochar produced in China is 20 cents, more or less, plus the expedition, of course. But when you are going to a big company like Michelin, like Pirelli, and try to remove carbon black from tires and try to sell them biochar instead, this is the number that say to you 0.02 euros per kilogram, 2 cents per kilograms for carbon black. So at the present moment, Italy is not really for the price war against carbon black. And carbon sequestration, as you saw, is not so easy. And the production of carbon credits from biochar, if you consider it with a from cradle to grave approach, is not so straightforward. So you are not actually producing carbon credits in Italy when you are producing biochar. And this is related to the energy cost, the geographic constraints, but as in Italy, you can find the same problems all around Europe, with few exceptions, but they're not so much, and maybe they are not impacting a lot. So another thing, and still on carbon balance on a simple pyrolysis process. Those are numbers. If I run a pyrolysis on 1 kilogram of dry biomass and I produce more or less from 60 to an average yield, let's say from 18 to 60 weight percentage of biochar. And considering the original biomass with a 33 weight percentage of carbon, a cellulose rich one, and I produce this amount of carbon from 1 kilogram of biomass, I lost every single kilogram of biochar around 50 grams of carbon, 25 grams of carbon. It means that 1 kilogram of dry biomass is producing around 0.2, 0.6 kilogram of biochar, with a loss of 0.3, more or less. Dario Yora, that's the point. The cost that you are in mind for carbon black is not the cost that a company that is consuming 20,000 of 20 tons each day of that material can bargain with the producers. They buy carbon black with trucks each day. So if I should produce it as side product, for example, from refinery in Porto Marghera, this is the price that I should sell to them because otherwise they are not buying it. So it's a very tricky business because one is the cost price that you can find on the common marketplace if you want to buy it for yourself, even if on large scale, 100 kilograms. But when you buy 10,000 tons every month for years and years and years, you have a lot of margins. And this is the other thing. When we are thinking like scientists, we are not thinking like marketmen because it's not our job. But when try to move from TRL 4 to TRL 5 and from TRL 5 to TRL 6, 7, 8, as you wish, this is the issue. And it's something that you'll never think about till you are facing it. And it's a real problem. You can try to balance it in some way, also with carbon credit, with the carbon that the CO2 that you can save from using biochar instead of carbon black. But still, you should have in mind that carbon negative technologies are the CO2 conversions technologies, not production of carbon. No, biochar. Biochar can help, can reduce the impact and save the CO2 from combustion of waste biomasses. But by itself, pyrolysis is not a carbon negative approach for conversion of biomasses because it's an endothermic process. In all of these numbers, you'll never see the energy cost of dry biomass, of heat the reactor. Of course, in the LCA, I consider it. But that's an issue, a great issue. And there are very few plants that are able to use fully green energy sources for production of biochar. And green energy is costly. And if you want to reduce the cost, you should compromise with something. And that it means that CO2 emission associated with your process is increasing. So, and here we are. These are the numbers of Italy, Charles market. 100 kilotons of biochar is here if you want to replace carbon black. Still, the price It's too high. And it is a problem because we want to reach the market. We want to replace and mitigate all of them. We did also try to answer during this talk also to the questions. The part of syngas, we can try to burn it in industrial burner. We have a project to do that. The point is, if you burn to produce electricity, it's nice, but what you have in the end, because in the end, you are trying to do what? To make a combustion using a syngas rich in hydrogen and CO. We try to enforce a project in these days with the company here for doing that, for move to production of only biochar and stress out the production of syngas. The point is that if you want to do that, you can try to do that, but the temperature for your reactor should be above 800 degrees. 800 degrees means it's a nightmarish. The system that Lamicolor enforce is 0. Gigawatt. It's huge, and that's a problem. We try also to combine with the solar panels. The balancing is still a problem, but we can discuss a little bit after I finish. Just give me one moment and I'll try to finish here. So, tires market, as I told, it's a problem, but also agricultural sector, because you can use biochar as amendment. There is a lot of space for doing that. It is beneficial for the crops. It is increasing the productivity, the water retention, the soil remediation. Still, the point is the same. If you want to amendment 1 hectare with biochar, and you should do a 2 centimeter layer of biochar in that soil, you should use tons of biochar, and it is cost. And here in Italy, can buy for €2 per gram. Let's say that you are lucky and you can buy it from €0.8, which is the agriculture industry that want to do that. Very few, trust me, very few. If you consider just some exception like some wine industry that can really create profit on the quality of the product, the other agriculture industry are a little bit. So I meant 4 years. Sure. Oh, sorry. Sure, for a year. And on how much big uh, crops? Could you face the same thing that is facing for the production of rice, of corn crops, with the same cost without impacting on the production, on the cost selling of the material? I'm not talking about the beneficial use of biochar. It is proved. I'm talking about when you are going to a farmer and say you should wait, you should increase your expenses year by year of 50% to improve the quality of the soil, to think about that soil is remain on the same level of productivity for 10 years more. They say, I don't care. That's the point. You can have the best results that you want, but these results must be balanced with reality. And reality is that industry doesn't care about environmental accountability unless regulation forced. So if you want to use it and use it with margins, profits, you must think about them. Spent a lot of time trying to convince a lot of companies that on the long period is a good investment, because if you are moving a lot in the future, we are going to that direction. But the point is still that actually, if you want to do that here, in South Europe, you are not on the industrial scale for the cost price, production, and standards for doing that. And standards is the other point I didn't discuss discuss here, but it's a key point that you should have in mind. If I buy carbon black, I can select A, B, C, and D. And these types are the same types all across the world as a commodity. EBI try to make standards for biochar, but still, those standards are made for biochar. They are not communicate with the one with carbon black. And if I have an entire production line based on that, and I ask, this standard is matching the carbon black that I'm using, you cannot answer. How you can answer to that? This is the other point, and it is one of the key points that we are working on, producing a standard that is not only a scientific one, but also a commercial one, in size, in extractives, something that is already started by Professor Mazek, for example, when we start the standardized biochar production. Those are our first European biochars that you can find with MSDS, at least same year after year. But we are far from reaching that all across those plants that you saw in the presentation. Because all of those plants producing biochar with different temperature, with different technologies, because there is not a standard for biochar production technologies, and all of them producing different materials. Different materials means that I'm buying 10,000 tons of materials for 6 months. I want to do that the same thing for the other 6 months, and you can guarantee that. That is the problem. Biochar is good, but biochar is, at least for these scales, a rookie. Carbon black is around since it's around uh, oil-based industry. We are discussing about 20 years against 1 century. And trust me, that 1 century is a lot of time that we should finish. So, just to conclude, here in Italy, we have a lot of possibility to do because there are companies that want using biochar instead of carbon black or using biochar just to improve the environmental soundness, let's say in a very polite way. And there are also companies that trust that biochar can represent a game change material, but still they're facing production that is far to be reliable, solid, and resilient that is required from industrial production, for a continuous industrial production. Because we are thinking generally only to the production of biochar as the industrial process. But the real point is if you want to reach the market, biochar should be a commodity, a little bit chain of a bigger chain that is industrial production by itself, including tires, cements, and so on. This is the key point. We must reach that, but at least in Italy we are far to reach that, even if we are working hard on this. So this is what I want to discuss today because it's a topic that generally is not discussed enough because we are always enthusiastic and focused on what we can do with biochar, and we are forgetting about what the other expected from us, in particular who is going to pay our research companies, not also Europe. So thank you for your time, and if you have, I'm ready to take your questions.